I went to a friend's house for a sleepover when I was about 12. His mum had a rule that nobody was allowed to walk on the carpet in the living room. Like, at all. If you wanted to cross the room to get to the kitchen, you had to jump from throw rug to throw rug, like you were playing The Floor is Lava. She wasn't doing it for fun. She was dead serious. She claimed that footprints ruined the aesthetic flow of the vacuum lines. If you missed a rug and stepped on the carpet, she would immediately get the vacuum out and redo the entire room while glaring at you. My college roommate invited me home for Thanksgiving. His parents had a rule that you had to pay for your own condiments. They had a literal price list taped to the refrigerator door. Ketchup was 10 cents a squirt, butter was 25 cents a pat, and salad dressing was 50 cents. I thought it was a joke, so I laughed when I saw it. His dad looked me dead in the eye and said, "Money doesn't grow on trees, son." I had to leave a dollar bill on the table after dinner because I used ranch dressing on my salad. I dated a girl whose family had a TV hierarchy. Her dad was the only one allowed to hold the remote. That's somewhat normal, but their rule was that nobody else was allowed to look at the TV if he wasn't watching it. If he left the room to go to the bathroom, the TV had to be turned off immediately. You couldn't just leave it on. When he came back, you had to wait for him to sit down, pick up the remote, and turn it back on before you could resume watching. It was like living in a dictatorship. I went to a friend's house where they weren't allowed to use the toilets for number 2 after 8 p.m. I asked what happens if you have an emergency. My friend handed me a plastic grocery bag and pointed to the backyard. Apparently, the father was convinced that flushing the toilet at night would wake up the house pipes and cause them to burst because the water pressure changes at night. I held it in for 14 hours until I went home the next morning. I never went back. My childhood best friend's house had a rule about the good room. A lot of people have a fancy living room, but this was next level. There was a velvet rope, like at a movie theatre, blocking the entrance. We were only allowed to look at the furniture from the doorway. One time, his little brother threw a bouncy ball and it rolled under the sofa in the good room. His mum got a pair of tongs to retrieve it because she didn't want human skin oils touching the floor. The room was fully furnished, but literally nobody had sat in there since 1998. I stayed with a host family in Germany who had a rule about showers. You were only allowed to shower for exactly 3 minutes. They had an egg timer taped to the shower door. The weird part wasn't saving water. It was the fact that you had to squeegee the entire shower stall, including the ceiling afterwards. If they found a single water droplet on the tiles, they would leave a passive-aggressive sticky note on your bedroom door saying, "Moisture is the enemy of the structure." My ex-girlfriend's parents were obsessed with visual clutter. They had a rule that absolutely nothing could be left on any surface. This included things like toothbrushes in the bathroom or a glass of water on a coaster. If you were drinking water and put the glass down to go to the bathroom, it would be in the dishwasher by the time you came back. You had to physically hold your drink the entire time you were consuming it. Watching a movie was exhausting because you couldn't put your popcorn bowl down. I had a friend in high school whose family required you to greet the dog before you greeted any humans. If you walked in and said, "Hi, Mrs. Johnson," she would ignore you completely until you got on your knees and said hello to their golden retriever. Once you acknowledged the dog, she would suddenly hear you and say hello back. One time, the dog was asleep in the other room, and she made me go find him and wake him up to say hello before she would let me ask if my friend was home. I went to a dinner party where the host had a rule that you couldn't mix foods on your fork. You had to eat one item at a time. You had to finish all your peas, then all your mashed potatoes, then all your meat. I took a bite of steak with some potato on the fork, and the host stopped chewing and stared at me. He whispered, "We don't make chaos on our plates in this house." I felt like I was in a psychological horror movie. A friend's dad was an electrical engineer and was obsessed with the light switches. You weren't allowed to flip a switch with your dirty fingers. You had to use your elbow or the back of your hand. He had installed little plastic shields over the wall plates, so you couldn't accidentally touch the wall paint. If he caught you using your index finger to turn on the lights, he would make you get a wet wipe and sanitize the switch immediately. We just sat in the dark most of the time. My cousin's house had a rule that all interior doors had to be left at a 45-degree angle, not open, not closed, exactly halfway. If you closed the bathroom door completely when you weren't in there, the airflow would get stagnant. If you left it wide open, it was untidy. His mum would walk around the house with a protractor, I kid you not, checking the angles of the doors. It was maddening. I stayed at a friend's house where you were required to strip your bed every single morning and stack the sheets and blankets in a specific pile in the corner. You couldn't just make the bed. Then, before you went to sleep at night, you had to remake the bed from scratch. The mum said that stale air gets trapped between the sheets if you leave the bed made all day. It took 15 minutes every night just to get into bed. I visited a house where the family was banned from saying the word no. They thought it brought negative energy into the home. Instead, they had to say, I would prefer a different option. I asked if I could have a glass of water, and the mum said, I would prefer a different option because they were out of clean glasses. It was so confusing. I asked, so no water? And she gasped like I had just cursed in church. My friend's parents had a rule about the stairs. You were only allowed to walk on the extreme edges of the steps, right up against the wall or the railing. You could not step in the middle of the stair. They claimed it was to prevent the carpet from wearing down in the centre. We had to walk up the stairs single file, hugging the wall like spies trying to avoid laser beams. My friend said he got grounded for a week once because he ran down the middle of the stairs. I went to a sleepover where the rule was that guests were not allowed to use the family towels. That's fine. Usually you bring your own or they give you a guest towel. But they gave me paper towels, like a roll of Bounty. I had to dry my entire body after a shower using paper towels. The mum said, cloth towels hold bacteria from strangers. I went through half a roll and still felt damp and sticky. We were playing video games at a friend's house, and his dad came in and told us we had exceeded our pixel limit. Apparently, they believed that looking at screens for too long would drain the electricity from your brain. The rule was 30 minutes of screen time, followed by 30 minutes of staring at a blank white wall to reset your retinas. We literally sat there staring at drywall for half an hour while his dad timed us. I dated a guy whose family didn't use trash cans. They didn't believe in keeping garbage inside the house for even a minute. If you unwrapped a candy bar, you had to immediately walk to the garage and put the wrapper in the outside bin. There were no small bins in the bathrooms or the kitchen. Cooking dinner involved running back and forth to the garage about 20 times. It was the most inefficient system I have ever seen. I went to a house where you had to announce your movements before you made them. If you were in the living room and wanted to go to the kitchen, you had to say, I am moving to the kitchen now. The dad said it was to prevent people from bumping into each other or being startled. I felt like an air traffic controller just trying to go pee. I am entering the hallway. I am approaching the bathroom. My friend's mum had a rule that all books on the bookshelf had to be arranged by height, not by author or genre. That sounds aesthetically pleasing, but she also required that all the spines be hidden. She turned the books backward, so all you saw were the beige pages. You couldn't tell what any book was without pulling it out. She said the colours of the book spines were too aggressive for the calm vibe of the living room. I stayed over at a friend's place where you weren't allowed to wear socks indoors. Not shoes, socks. You had to be barefoot. The mum thought that socks polished the floor too much and made it slippery, which was a safety hazard. It was the middle of winter, and the house had hardwood floors. My toes were blue the entire weekend. I tried to sneak socks on at night and got caught. A family I knew had a speaking stick at the dinner table. It was literally a painted stick. You were not allowed to speak unless you were holding it. It made casual conversation impossible. You'd ask, "Can you pass the salt?" But you couldn't ask that because your dad was holding the stick, talking about his golf game. By the time you got the stick, the food was cold and you didn't need the salt anymore. I went to a house where the refrigerator was locked with a bicycle chain. The mum had the key around her neck. If you wanted a snack, you had to petition for it. You had to present a valid reason for why you were hungry. I played soccer for 2 hours was valid. I'm just bored was not. It felt like applying for a loan just to get a cheese stick. My friend's parents had a rule that you couldn't laugh after 9 p.m. They said the neighbours could hear it, and it was rude. We were watching a funny movie and trying to stifle our laughter so hard that I started hiccuping. The dad came in and told me to control my diaphragm or go sleep in the car. He wasn't joking. I visited a home where every piece of furniture was covered in that thick, clear plastic. That's old school, but they had a rule that you couldn't sit on the plastic if you were wearing denim. Apparently, the rivets on jeans could scratch the plastic that was protecting the sofa. So if you wore jeans, you had to sit on a wooden folding chair they brought out from the closet. I sat on wood for 4 hours while they lounged on the sofa. I knew a family that had assigned seating in the living room, not just for dinner but for hanging out. The dad had the recliner, the mum had the love seat, and the kids had specific spots on the floor. Even if the parents weren't home, the kids wouldn't sit on the furniture. I sat in the dad's chair once while waiting for my friend to get ready, and his little sister looked at me like I had just defused a bomb incorrectly. "You're going to die when he gets home," she whispered. I went to a house where you had to wash your hands before you used the bathroom, and then again after. The logic was that your hands are dirty from the world, and you don't want to touch your private parts with dirty hands. Then you wash after for obvious reasons. I spent half my time there standing at the sink. My friend's mum was obsessed with symmetrical dining. If you took a bite of chicken from the left side of your plate, your next bite had to be from the right side of the plate to keep the weight distribution even. She would actually comment on it. "Your plate looks heavy on the left, Stephen." It made eating stressful because you had to do geometry in your head just to enjoy your mashed potatoes. I stayed at a house where the Wi-Fi password changed every single day. To get the new password, the kids and guests had to complete a chore or solve a math equation. I woke up and just wanted to check my email, but the mum handed me a sheet of algebra problems. "Solve for X if you want to surf the web," she said with a smile. I used my data plan instead. I went to a house where they didn't believe in overhead lighting. They only used lamps, but the rule was you could only have one lamp on per room at a time to save electricity. If you walked into the living room and turned on the reading lamp, you had to turn off the floor lamp. It was like living in a cave. We played board games by the light of a single 40-watt bulb. My friend's family had a rule that you couldn't use the front door, ever. It was for aesthetic purposes only. Everyone, including guests, the pizza delivery guy and the mailman, had to come around to the back door through the muddy yard. Inside, the front door had a potted plant in front of it, so you physically couldn't open it. I asked what happens in a fire, and the dad said, "We'll move the plant."